The metal doors slid open with a quiet hiss. Commander Ethan Kane stepped inside, expecting to find an empty chamber. Instead, his breath caught in his throat. Standing in the center of the dimly lit room was her, the alien princess. For a second, neither of them moved. The air was thick with tension, a strange hum of energy crackling between them. She had been alone, completely unprepared for his arrival. He saw it in her wide, violet eyes. Shock, panic, fear. Ethan was not supposed to be here. He knew that much. The chamber was deep within the royal palace, a place restricted to outsiders. He had been sent on a diplomatic mission to meet with the High Council, but something had felt off. The guards had been too quick to dismiss him, and whispers of secrets floated through the air like ghosts. So he had followed his instincts. He had followed the whispers. And now he was face to face with a secret no one was supposed to see. The princess took a step back, her long silver robe flowing like liquid metal. But something flickered. Ethan narrowed his eyes. For a brief moment, her form glitched, like a broken hologram. Her delicate features shimmered, shifting into something else. And then it was gone. But he had seen it. His heart pounded. "What are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer. Instead, she raised her hand to a small control panel on her wrist and pressed a button. A red light blinked. An alarm. Ethan took a step forward. "Wait. Leave." Her voice was sharp, commanding, but there was an unmistakable tremble in it. He didn't move. He couldn't. His mind was racing. What had just happened? What had he seen? The princess clenched her jaw. Her violet eyes darted to the door behind him, then back to his face. "You need to leave. Now. Not until you tell me what's going on." Her hands curled into fists. She was breathing faster now, as if she were trying to keep herself under control. Ethan wasn't sure what he had expected from this mission, but it wasn't this. A hidden truth, a royal secret, and now an alarm ringing in the distance, signaling that guards were coming. He could leave now, walk away, pretend he had seen nothing. But something inside him wouldn't let him. Because for a moment, just a split second, he had seen something in her eyes, not just fear, but desperation. And that made him wonder. What if the princess wasn't just afraid of him? What if she was afraid of who might come next? The alarm grew louder. The footsteps of approaching guards echoed through the halls. Ethan had to decide, stay and uncover the truth or escape before it was too late. Ethan's mind raced as the alarm blared louder. The princess stood frozen, her fingers hovering over the control panel on her wrist. She wasn't looking at him anymore. Instead, her gaze was fixed on the door behind him, as if she were counting the seconds before the guards arrived. Ethan took a step forward. "They're coming for me, aren't they?" She flinched, just slightly, but enough for him to notice. "You didn't call them for me," he realized. "You called them for yourself." Her violet eyes flicked back to him, and for a brief moment, he saw something he hadn't expected: regret. But then she squared her shoulders, her face hardening into something unreadable. "You need to leave. Not until you tell me what's happening," Ethan said firmly. She hesitated, and in that hesitation, he saw the truth. She didn't want him to leave. But she couldn't say that. Not out loud. A metallic thud echoed through the chamber as the outer security doors locked into place. The palace had gone into high alert. There was no walking away now. The princess exhaled sharply, her hands shaking just a little as she turned away from him. "You weren't supposed to see that." Ethan crossed his arms. "See what?" "You know what." His jaw clenched. He had seen something, a glitch in her form, something that suggested she wasn't entirely who she claimed to be. But the deeper question wasn't what he had seen. It was why she had been hiding it in the first place. A loud bang sounded from the other side of the door. The guards had arrived. The princess turned back to him, her expression unreadable. Then she did something unexpected. She reached for his wrist and pressed a button on his communicator. A sharp static sound filled his earpiece, then silence. "They've disabled your comms," she said. "No one is coming for you." Ethan inhaled slowly. "So I'm trapped." "No," she swallowed. "We both are." Another bang. The door shuddered under the force of something heavy slamming against it. Ethan glanced toward the control panel near the exit. If he could get to it before the guards did. "They won't let you leave," the princess said, as if reading his thoughts. "Not alive, anyway." Ethan turned back to her. "And you?" Her lips pressed together. "I won't be leaving either." For the first time since he had entered, he really looked at her. She stood tall, proud, but there was something in the way her hands trembled slightly, the way she kept glancing at the door as if waiting for her fate to arrive. She wasn't just shocked that he had seen her, she was terrified. Ethan took a deep breath. "Why do they want you locked away?" She hesitated again. Then finally, in a quiet voice, she said, "Because I'm not supposed to exist." Ethan's blood ran cold. A hidden royal. A secret identity. And now, the entire palace was hunting them both. Another slam against the door. The locks wouldn't hold much longer. The princess met his gaze, and this time, there was no hesitation. Only determination. "I have a way out," she said. "But you have to trust me." Ethan didn't move for a second. He had no reason to trust her. But something told him that if he didn't, neither of them would be alive much longer. He nodded. "Lead the way." Without another word, she grabbed his wrist and pulled him toward the far wall. As she pressed her palm against the surface, the metal shimmered and vanished, revealing a dark tunnel beyond. A secret passage. She stepped inside first, glancing back at him. "Are you coming?" The doors behind them groaned as the guards finally broke through. Ethan had no choice. He followed her into the darkness. The tunnel was colder than Ethan expected. The moment they stepped inside, the air changed, thin, crisp, and unnervingly silent. The walls pulsed faintly with a soft blue light, casting eerie shadows as they moved forward. Behind them, the distant sound of the breaking door echoed through the narrow passage. The guards had made it inside. The princess moved quickly, her silver robe flowing behind her like liquid light. Ethan kept up, his boots barely making a sound against the metallic floor. "Where does this lead?" he asked. "Out," she replied shortly. He wasn't satisfied with that answer. "Out where?" She didn't look back. "Somewhere safer than here." He wasn't sure if he believed that. He wasn't even sure if he believed her. The entire situation was spinning out of control, and the more he thought about it, the more questions piled up in his mind. The most important one being, who exactly was she? He had been sent here for diplomatic negotiations, an attempt to secure peace between humanity and the alien empire. He had read reports, studied files, memorized names and faces. There was no mention of a princess. The royal family was small, and the throne belonged to the emperor's only son. A prince. No daughters. No other heirs. So why did she say she wasn't supposed to exist? The tunnel twisted ahead, splitting into two separate paths. The princess didn't hesitate. She veered left, moving with a sense of purpose that told Ethan she had been down here before. "How do you know about this passage?" he asked. Finally, she stopped. She turned toward him, her expression unreadable in the dim blue glow. "Because I built it." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "You built it?" "Not alone," she admitted. "But yes, this passage exists because I needed a way out." Her words sent a strange chill through him. "Out of your own palace?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and continued walking. Ethan exhaled sharply but followed. He was missing something. Something big. After another turn, the tunnel opened into a wider chamber. The walls stretched upward, disappearing into darkness. A single metal platform hovered in the center, suspended by energy fields, leading toward a towering set of doors at the far end. The princess stepped forward, pressing her palm against a panel on the wall. The floating platform hummed to life, shifting slightly under an invisible force. Ethan frowned. A transport system. She nodded. It's the fastest way to the lower levels. From there, we can reach the outer corridors and... A sudden clank echoed from the tunnel behind them. Ethan spun around. In the distance, shadows flickered against the walls. They weren't alone. The princess cursed under her breath and hurried onto the platform. Come on. Ethan jumped on just as the energy field pulsed. The platform shot forward, gliding across the chamber at an alarming speed. Behind them, the tunnel filled with movement, armored figures emerging from the darkness, their weapons raised. Then, gunfire. Bright streaks of plasma sizzled through the air, striking the edges of the floating platform. Ethan ducked instinctively as one shot whizzed past his head. The princess pressed another sequence into the panel beside her, and suddenly, the gravity shifted. The platform tilted sharply, sending them both tumbling to one side as it spiraled downward. The guards' shots went wild, missing them by inches. Ethan grabbed the edge of the platform for balance, glancing at the princess. She was holding onto the controls, her face tense but focused. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" he muttered. She didn't look at him, not even a little. The platform leveled out just as they reached the lower section of the chamber. The doors ahead hissed open, revealing yet another tunnel. But this one was different. It wasn't sleek and metallic like the palace corridors. It was old, stone walls covered in dust, dimly lit by flickering red lights. Ethan frowned. This doesn't look like an escape route. The princess stepped off the platform. Because it isn't. He stared at her. Then what is it? She turned back to him, her violet eyes unreadable. The reason they want me dead. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. The guards were still coming, but Ethan barely heard them. His mind was spinning. What had he just stepped into? Ethan hesitated at the threshold of the tunnel. His instincts screamed at him to be careful. This wasn't just an escape route. It was something else. Something she had been hiding all along. Behind them, the sound of boots on metal echoed through the chamber. The guards had reached the platform above. Plasma bolts sizzled past, scorching the walls. "Move," the princess urged. Ethan didn't have time to argue. He followed her through the passage, and the door sealed shut behind them with a loud hiss. For a moment, the silence was suffocating. The tunnel stretched out before them, dark and ancient, its rough stone walls completely different from the polished metal of the palace above. The air smelled of dust, damp rock, and something else, something old. Ethan glanced at the princess. "Where the hell are we?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pressed her palm against a hidden panel in the wall. A soft rumble echoed through the tunnel as faint golden lights flickered to life along the ceiling. Ethan could see it now. The place was massive. The tunnel wasn't just a passage. It was part of a much larger structure. Pillars lined the walls, ancient carvings covering their surfaces in symbols he didn't recognize. And then he saw them. Rows of metallic pods, dozens of them, built into the stone like forgotten relics. Ethan stepped closer, wiping away dust from one of the pods. Beneath the glass, something moved. His breath caught. A figure lay inside, still and preserved. Not human, but not quite like the princess either. He took a step back. What is this place? The princess exhaled, finally turning to face him. A graveyard. Ethan frowned. These people, they're dead. Her violet eyes darkened. Not yet, but they've been asleep for a long time. Ethan's stomach tightened. How long? She hesitated, then said, "Over 1,000 years." The weight of her words hit him like a physical force. He turned back to the pods, scanning the faces behind the glass. They were frozen in time, their bodies preserved in some kind of suspended animation. He had seen cryosleep before, but never like this. This wasn't a simple stasis chamber. It was something far more advanced, far older than any technology he had ever encountered. His eyes flicked back to the princess. "Who are they?" She swallowed hard. My people. Ethan's pulse spiked. What? She turned away, running her fingers across the carvings on the wall. The royal family told the galaxy that our race was dying out, that we had no future, but that was a lie. Ethan took a slow step forward. They erased them. She nodded. They didn't just erase them. They buried them. His mind was spinning. This changed everything. The royal family had controlled the empire for centuries. They ruled with absolute power, claiming they were the last of their kind. But if what she was saying was true, if these pods were full of survivors, then the empire had been built on a lie. A deep boom echoed through the tunnel. The doors behind them shuddered. The guards were still hunting them. Ethan turned back to her. Why are they after you? She clenched her fists. Because I'm the last one who knows the truth. And if they kill me, this place dies with me. Everything clicked into place. She wasn't just a princess. She was a threat. And now so was he. A warning chime sounded from the control panel. The princess cursed under her breath. They found another way in, she said. Ethan glanced at the tunnel ahead. Is there another way out? She hesitated. There's one. But it's risky. Risky is better than dead, he muttered. She nodded and moved toward a nearby console, pressing a sequence of buttons. A low hum filled the air as part of the wall slid open, revealing a passage that led downward. Ethan's gut tightened. If they went deeper, there was no turning back. The princess met his gaze. You still have a chance to walk away. You don't have to be part of this. Ethan shook his head. Too late for that. For the first time, something like respect flickered in her eyes. She turned and stepped into the passage. Ethan followed. As the doors sealed behind them, he knew one thing for certain. Whatever they found next would change the galaxy forever. The tunnel sloped downward at a sharp angle, the air growing colder with every step. The princess moved quickly, her silver robe barely visible in the dim glow of the ancient lights. Ethan followed, his mind racing. He had come here expecting negotiations, peace talks, the usual diplomatic nonsense. Instead, he had stumbled into a secret graveyard of the forgotten, a hidden truth that the empire would kill to keep buried. Behind them, the deep metallic boom of the security door, buckling under pressure, sent a chill through his spine. They're breaching the chamber, he muttered. The princess didn't stop. They will chase us until one of us is dead. Ethan clenched his jaw. Why? Because you know the truth. She glanced at him. Because I am the truth. A shiver ran down his spine at the weight of those words. They reached the bottom of the tunnel, where the passage split into 3 separate paths. The princess hesitated for the first time. Which way? Ethan asked. She scanned the walls, fingers brushing against old symbols carved into the stone. Some of them glowed faintly, reacting to her presence. This one, she said, stepping toward the leftmost tunnel. Ethan followed without hesitation. The new passage was wider, lined with rows of ancient machines embedded into the walls. Strange devices hummed softly, their functions unknown. Some of them looked broken. Fractured screens, rusted panels, shattered glass. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What is this place? A laboratory, the princess answered. Ethan stopped. A laboratory. She nodded but didn't look at him. Her fingers ran across a dust-covered control panel, wiping away centuries of neglect. A soft blue light flickered to life beneath her touch. Before my people were erased, she said, they worked in secret. They built technology beyond what the empire allowed. They experimented, studied, and prepared for a future that was stolen from them. Ethan took a slow step forward. You mean the empire didn't just erase them? They hunted them down. The princess's shoulders stiffened. Yes. Ethan exhaled. This was bigger than he had imagined. The empire had always controlled history, rewriting the past to fit their rule. But if this place still existed, if these scientists had survived long enough to leave something behind, then there was a chance to prove everything. A chance to destroy the empire's greatest lie. The princess pressed another sequence of buttons. A low hum filled the air as part of the wall split open, revealing a massive circular chamber. Ethan stepped inside and felt his breath catch. At the center of the room stood a giant crystalline structure, tall as a building, pulsing with slow rhythmic light. It wasn't just a machine. It was alive. Ethan instinctively reached for his weapon. "What the hell is that?" The princess turned to him, her expression unreadable. "The last hope of my people," she said. "And maybe yours too." Before Ethan could respond, a sharp alarm blared from the tunnel behind them. The guards had found them. The princess's eyes darkened. "We're out of time." She turned back to the machine and placed her hand against the surface. The crystal shuddered, reacting to her touch. A flood of golden energy pulsed outward, washing over the room like a wave. Ethan stumbled back, shielding his eyes. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer. The room rumbled as something deep within the structure awoke. The ground shook, the lights flickered, and then a voice echoed through the chamber. Deep, ancient, and not human. Identifying genetic signature. Confirmed. Initiating restoration protocol. Ethan felt his stomach drop. "What did you just activate?" he demanded. The princess turned to him, her violet eyes glowing with newfound energy. "My people," she whispered. A sudden explosion rocked the tunnel behind them. The guards had blown through the last barrier. "Go," she yelled. Ethan barely had time to react before the chamber erupted into chaos. The crystal pulsed brighter, and suddenly, the pods in the graveyard above began to open. The Forgotten were waking up. And the Empire was about to face the truth they had buried for 1,000 years. The air hummed with energy, a pulse of raw power radiating from the massive crystalline structure at the heart of the chamber. The light spilling from its surface grew brighter, illuminating the symbols carved into the walls, casting eerie, shifting shadows. Ethan barely had time to process what was happening before the first hiss of a pod unlocking filled the chamber. Then another. And another. The Forgotten were waking up. He turned to the princess, but she was already moving, her violet eyes glowing with the same golden energy now coursing through the room. The air around her seemed charged, her very presence vibrating with an ancient force that had been dormant for far too long. "What did you do?" Ethan demanded. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The pods lining the upper walls burst open, sending clouds of frost and mist swirling into the air. Figures emerged, tall, regal, alien, their bodies sleek and adorned with intricate biometallic armor. Some gasped for breath, as if taking in their first lungful of air in centuries. Others immediately reached for weapons stored at their sides, their instincts sharp, their movements unnervingly coordinated. Ethan instinctively took a step back, his fingers twitching toward his own gun. This was no ordinary awakening. These people weren't dazed or confused. They were ready. The princess turned to face them, her expression unreadable. Then, in a voice that carried through the vast chamber like a command from the gods themselves, she spoke. "You have slept long enough." A deep rumble echoed through the chamber as the crystal's pulsing light synchronized with the figures standing before her. Some of them clenched their fists, their skin flickering with raw energy, their bodies adapting instantly to their surroundings. They weren't just warriors. They were a lost army. Ethan swallowed hard. The Empire had lied. These weren't the remnants of a dying race. They were its greatest weapon, and the Empire had buried them out of fear. A sudden explosion shook the chamber, and Ethan spun toward the entrance. The doors blew apart in a shower of molten metal and rock, sending debris flying across the room. A squad of heavily armed Imperial guards stormed in, their weapons raised, their black armor glinting under the pulsating golden light. For a moment, everything froze. The soldiers hesitated. They had been expecting two fugitives, not an entire force of newly awakened warriors. Ethan barely had time to take a breath before the room erupted into chaos. The first shot rang out, a streak of burning plasma aimed directly at the princess. She didn't flinch. She didn't need to. Before the shot could reach her, one of the newly awakened warriors moved faster than Ethan's eyes could track, intercepting the blast with a raised palm. The energy dissipated against their body like it was nothing. And then they attacked. The air filled with the sound of battle cries, weapons igniting, the clash of metal and energy. The forgotten warriors launched forward, their movements too fast, too precise, their bodies surging with newfound strength. The Imperial soldiers never stood a chance. One by one, they were cut down, overwhelmed by a force they hadn't been trained to fight. Ethan ducked as a stray blast nearly took his head off. He turned to the princess, who was standing at the heart of the battlefield, completely calm. She met his gaze, her voice steady. "Now you see why they fear us." Ethan's heart pounded. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a war being reignited. The Empire had spent centuries erasing the past, but now the past had returned, and it was coming for them. The battlefield was unrecognizable. The once silent chamber, where the forgotten had slumbered for centuries, had turned into a storm of chaos and fury. The golden glow of the crystal pulsed in rhythm with the warriors, their movements almost supernatural, as if they were fueled by something far beyond mere muscle and bone. Ethan had seen battle before. He had fought in wars, led missions, survived things no human should have survived. But this was something else. The Empire's elite soldiers were being torn apart effortlessly. Plasma bolts barely found their marks before the awakened warriors moved like shadows, shifting through the battlefield with precision that made Ethan's skin crawl. One soldier raised his rifle, aiming directly at the princess. Ethan didn't think. He moved. His pistol roared, the shot striking the soldier square in the chest, sending him collapsing into a heap of armor and burnt flesh. The princess turned to him, her violet eyes unreadable. For a moment, he thought she would chastise him for interfering. Instead, she gave him a small nod. Ethan barely had time to breathe before the floor shook violently. Something huge was coming. The Imperial forces weren't just sending squads anymore. They had realized what they were facing, and they had called in the real monsters. A deep mechanical rumble echoed through the tunnels, followed by a metallic clank, then another, and another. Ethan's stomach dropped. "Tell me that's not what I think it is," he muttered. The princess's expression darkened. "They've sent an eradicator." Ethan swore under his breath. Of course they had. Eradicators weren't ordinary machines. They were walking extinction events. Towering war machines, programmed with one purpose, to erase anything that the Empire deemed a threat. Indestructible armor, advanced targeting systems, and enough firepower to wipe out entire cities. The air grew thick with tension as the first glimpse of the beast emerged from the tunnel. 10 feet tall, heavily plated. Its black armor gleamed under the golden light, its massive arms ending in a combination of cannons and blades. Its red, soulless optics scanned the battlefield, locking onto the awakened warriors. Ethan took a step back. Even these warriors wouldn't be able to fight that thing head-on. Then, without warning, the eradicator opened fire. A shockwave of destruction ripped through the chamber. Explosions tore through the stone walls, sending debris and bodies flying. The air filled with fire and dust as warriors and soldiers alike were caught in the machine's path of destruction. Ethan hit the ground hard, rolling behind a fallen pillar for cover. He coughed, his ears ringing from the blast. Through the smoke, he saw the princess standing, unmoving. She was staring at the eradicator, her hands clenched at her sides. And then, for the first time, Ethan saw something different in her. The glow around her wasn't just energy. It was rage. The eradicator turned its cannons toward her. The targeting systems whirred, locking on. Ethan's heart nearly stopped. "Move," he shouted. But she didn't. The machine fired. A massive bolt of burning plasma tore through the air, and then stopped. Ethan's eyes went wide. The attack had frozen inches from the princess's face, crackling in midair like lightning caught in a storm. The energy swirled, bending as if being pulled into something unseen. The princess lifted her hand, and the plasma imploded. The Eradicator staggered backward. For the first time, the unstoppable killing machine hesitated. Ethan had no idea what he was witnessing. But the princess, she looked furious. "You have taken everything from us," she whispered, her voice resonating with something ancient. "Our people, our history, our future." The glow around her exploded outward like a supernova. The air crackled with power. The warriors around her froze, staring in silent reverence. The Eradicator charge. She didn't run. She met it head-on. The impact shook the entire chamber. The moment the machine's massive blade came down, the princess caught it with her bare hands. Ethan had no words. The blade, designed to cut through entire battleships, didn't move. The metal around her fingers buckled, warping as energy poured from her body. Then, with a single motion, she ripped the weapon apart. The Eradicator reeled back, its systems glitching, struggling to comprehend what was happening. The princess raised her hand, and energy surged forward, wrapping around the machine like a vice. The metal groaned, bending inward, collapsing under a force it wasn't designed to withstand. Then she crushed it. The entire machine imploded, its massive body crumpling like paper beneath a force beyond understanding. Silence fell over the battlefield. The remaining Imperial soldiers stood frozen, their weapons lowered. They had come expecting to erase history. Instead, they had awakened something unstoppable. The princess turned to them, her violet eyes blazing. "Run," she commanded. And they did. The Empire had sent its deadliest weapon to end this rebellion before it could begin. But instead of crushing the last of a forgotten people, they had just given birth to their worst nightmare. Ethan exhaled, pushing himself to his feet. He met the princess's gaze. "So what now?" She turned to the glowing crystal behind her. It pulsed, responding to her presence. "Now," she said softly. "Now, we finish what they started." The Forgotten had risen. The Empire had made its move, and the war was only beginning.